A decaying manor on the edge of town, untouched for decades. Daniel leaned back in his chair, heart hammering. The sensible part of him screamed to ignore it. But curiosity, dark, insistent, whispered louder. Without wasting another thought, he grabbed his jacket. If the mirror room really existed, he had to see it for himself. ... It all began on an ordinary evening. Daniel sat hunched over his desk, buried in his notes for a late-night study session. The room was silent, except for the scratch of his pen, until something strange happened. Across the top page of his notebook, words appeared as though carved by an invisible hand. The mirror room. Daniel froze, staring in disbelief. He hadn't written it. The ink was darker, jagged, almost alive. His pulse quickened. Curiosity gnawed at him, and the rain fell hard against the rusted iron gates as Daniel pushed them open, their metallic groan echoing into the darkness. The mansion stood like a giant shadow, its windows lifeless, its walls cracked with age. He had come here to investigate rumors of a cursed mirror hidden inside, an artifact said to show not reflections, but futures of death. The air felt heavier with every step, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the temperature seemed to plummet. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water from the broken ceiling. In the distance, faintly, he thought he heard a whisper, a voice calling his name. He froze. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the dust-filled air as he explored the creaking corridors. Most doors stood open, revealing rooms swallowed by decay, broken furniture, torn curtains, and walls stained with mold. But at the very end of the hall, Daniel pushed the door open with a shaky hand, its hinges groaning as if resisting his entry. The room smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like old blood. In the center stood a massive, dust-covered mirror, framed in dark, ornate carvings of twisted faces and clawed hands. The glass shimmered strangely, as though water rippled across its surface, despite the stillness of the air. His reflection appeared faint, distorted, like a shadow of himself. He stepped closer, breath fogging against the cold surface. For a moment, he thought he saw his reflection. Daniel's throat went dry as he stared into the warped glass. The shadowy figure behind him did not vanish this time. It grew sharper, its outline resembling a tall woman draped in tattered black cloth. Her face was hidden beneath a veil of darkness, but her pale, skeletal hands pressed against the inside of the mirror, as if begging to be freed. Daniel spun around quickly, but the room behind him was empty, only dust swirling in the beam of his flashlight. He turned back to the mirror and nearly dropped the light. The figure was now closer, her hands scraping the inside of the glass. Daniel staggered back, his breath ragged as the mirror throbbed like something alive. The woman's hands pressed harder against the surface, and to his horror, the glass began to bend outward, bulging as though it were liquid. A skeletal fingertip pierced through, leaving a crack that spiderwebbed across the surface. Daniel's flashlight flickered violently, shadows jerking across the room. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real. This can't be real." But the ghost's hand slid further, pale and dripping with something black, like ink or tar. The air filled with the stench of rot, as the sound of scraping nails turned into a shrill screech. He backed into the wall, trembling, when suddenly the mirror snapped back to its normal shape, the hand vanishing as if nothing had happened. Silence fell, suffocating. Daniel pressed his back against the cold, cracked wall, his heart slamming like a drum in his chest. He dared to lift the flashlight again, sweeping it across the room. Nothing. Just dust, cobwebs, and silence. But when the beam fell on the mirror, he froze. The woman was no longer inside it. The glass reflected only Daniel, wide-eyed and shaking. He swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat burning. Slowly, he lowered the flashlight, only to see her standing in the corner of the room, half shrouded in shadow. Her form flickered, unstable, like smoke struggling to stay solid. Daniel's hands trembled so violently that the flashlight slipped from his grip, clattering across the floor. Darkness swallowed him, leaving only the faint, unnatural glow of the mirror. He dropped to his knees, scrambling for the light, when he felt it, a sudden icy grip brushing across his shoulder. His breath hitched, the cold sinking through his skin like knives. Slowly, with every ounce of courage, he turned his head. The woman was crouched beside him, her face inches away. Her black eyes were wide and unblinking, her jaw slack, as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came. Daniel let out a strangled cry and swung his arm blindly, passing straight through her like mist. The air grew heavier, pressing down on Daniel's chest as if the room itself wanted to crush him. He clutched the flashlight and swung it wildly, its beam landing on the mirror. The woman was gone again. A sudden crash behind him made him whip around. An old chair hurled across the room on its own, splintering against the wall. Before he could react, icy hands wrapped tightly around his throat. Daniel gagged, thrashing, but there was nothing visible holding him. His flashlight spun across the floor, beams scattering wildly. Then, in a horrifying instant, the ghost materialized. Her face. Daniel staggered backward, every nerve in his body screaming to escape, yet his legs felt like stone. The mirror pulsed brighter now, its surface swirling, as though it were a pool of liquid waiting to consume him. Without warning, a force yanked at his chest, dragging him forward across the dusty floor. His nails clawed at the wooden boards, splinters tearing into his skin, but the pull was relentless. The ghost appeared inside the mirror again, arms outstretched. Daniel's fingernails split as he clawed at the floor, his body inches from the mirror's liquid surface. With a last burst of strength, he kicked sideways, his boot striking the fallen flashlight. By sheer luck, Its beam shot directly at the mirror. The surface quivered violently, the ghost shrieking in rage as smoke poured from the glass. The pole loosened just enough for Daniel to crawl backward, gasping. He stumbled to his feet, staggering toward the doorway, but the door slammed shut with a deafening crack before he could reach it. The mirror behind him thundered like a beating heart, cracks spreading across its surface. Slowly, impossibly, the ghost stepped halfway out of the mirror, her body dripping with black liquid, her movements jerky like a puppet on broken strings. Her head twisted unnaturally toward him as she hissed, "You cannot leave." Daniel stumbled back, pressing himself against the locked door as the ghost emerged further from the mirror, her skeletal frame dripping with thick black ooze that stained the floorboards. Her eyes, pits of endless void, fixed on him with predatory hunger. Before he could react, her arms shot forward with unnatural speed, cold fingers wrapping around his wrists like iron shackles. Daniel screamed, thrashing, but she was impossibly strong. With a violent jerk, she dragged him across the floor toward the quivering glass. His heels dug into the wood, leaving gouges, but the pull was unstoppable. The mirror's surface expanded like an open mouth, swirling with shadows that reached outward like tendrils. His reflection inside the mirror was no longer his own. It was her, smiling with him. The pull became unbearable, and with one final wrench, Daniel was yanked through the surface. He expected to crash against glass, but instead he plunged into a suffocating void. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled of decay. He staggered to his feet, realizing he was inside a twisted version of the same room. The walls bled black liquid, and the floorboards pulsed like living flesh beneath his shoes. The mirror was still there, but now it showed the real world outside, where his own body stood motionless, eyes black, a faint smile on its lips. Panic surged. Was he already replaced? A whisper curled around him, echoing from every corner. "This is where you belong." He spun, and dozens of distorted reflections of the ghost stared at him from the dripping walls, their mouths opening in unison, releasing a shriek so piercing, Daniel clutched his head, the shrieking echoes drilling into his skull, until suddenly, silence. The dripping walls faded, and the pulsing floor stilled. He blinked, disoriented, only to find himself standing once again in the real room. The mirror stood before him, cracked but quiet, reflecting nothing unusual. His chest heaved with relief. "It's over," he whispered shakily, stumbling toward the door. This time, the handle turned freely beneath his hand. The hallway outside was dim, but normal. Dust and cobwebs exactly as he had seen before. Heart racing with hope, he stepped forward, only to feel a sharp sting in his palm. He looked down and froze. His hand was bleeding, tiny shards of embedded in his skin. When he turned back, Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps as the illusion of freedom dissolved around him. The cracked walls began to melt, black liquid pouring down like tar, and from it, the ghost emerged fully. No longer veiled, her form towered over him, a grotesque mix of decayed flesh and smoke. Her limbs unnaturally long, her fingers curled into claws. Her face twisted, jaw splitting until it nearly reached her chest. Rows of jagged, rotten teeth lining the darkness inside. Daniel stumbled back, but the floor beneath him writhed, gripping his ankles like living vines. The ghost bent low, her rancid breath washing over his face as she hissed his name, stretching it until it became an inhuman wail. His ears rang, blood trickling as the sound drilled into him. Then she opened her clawed hand, pressing it against his chest. Daniel screamed as the ghost's claws sank deeper into his chest, his vision blurring. He thrashed desperately, but the vines held him fast. With a guttural growl, the ghost shoved him backward into the mirror's surface, which swallowed him whole like liquid. For a moment, silence fell. The room returned to its decrepit stillness. The mirror cracked, but calm. Then, slowly, the glass shimmered. On the other side stood Daniel, or what looked like him. He stepped forward, his movements steady, his face calm, but his eyes were bottomless black voids, and his reflection smirked, even though his lips didn't move. The Daniel in the real world turned toward the door and walked away, leaving the house as if nothing had happened. Inside the mirror, the real Daniel pounded